In a world where global tensions simmer just beneath the surface, there's a conflict brewing that's closer than most of us realize. Let's dive deep into the intricate and increasingly tense relationship between China and Australia. For the time being, the Australian government has eased tensions with Beijing. Although the relationship may seem less intense on the surface, there is still a lot of conflict there. The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, deserves praise for bringing down tensions between the two nations. He was well supported in this endeavor by his defense and foreign ministers Richard Marles and Penny Wong. But do you have any idea what happened between Australia and China? Even if you don't, we are going to share the complete story here. Following Prime Minister Scott Morrison's request for an inquiry into COVID-19's beginnings in April 2020, China became enraged with Australia. Later in 2020, the relationship hit its lowest point when the Chinese embassy in Canberra posted the now famous 14 Chinese grievances list, which served as justification for a broad range of export restrictions. The list included Australia's ban on Huawei from its 5G network, restrictions on Chinese ownership of vital Australian infrastructure, laws against foreign interference, and Australia's continued support of a free press. Additionally, a return to civility shouldn't be discounted after several years during which Canberra's calls went unanswered in Beijing. Moreover, Australian goods were subjected to billion-dollar sanctions. Several Australians living in China were arrested, and Chinese state media referred to Australia as chewing gum stuck under China's shoe, while disseminating doctored images of Australian soldiers killing Afghan babies. Can you spot any further reasons that can help Australia and China avoid becoming involved in a conflict? At the June Shangri-La Summit in Singapore, Albanese stated that diplomatic discourse is the first and most essential guardrail of diplomacy. Albanese correctly states that conditions for both countries to expect the worst of one another were established by years of deep freeze between Australia and China. However, the strategic hostility between the two nations is only growing behind the grins and selfies. Even in commerce, where China's industry has long benefited from Australia's resource-rich economy, highly politicized Chinese penalties on Australian exports are still very much in force. Hence, this emphasizes how difficult it is to negotiate with China. Why do you think China might put forward a policy that affects Australians? Is that because they fear that Australia might take over them? Share your thoughts in the comments. Though the tone of the wolf warrior may have been somewhat toned down, the core of the Chinese Communist Party's expansionist policies has not changed. In November 2022, Albanese stated that Australia and China will cooperate where we can, but disagree where we must in their relationship. China believed that this was how his government would define the relationship. But what if reaching a real agreement is nearly impossible? When Li Shangfu, China's military minister, remarked on freedom of navigation exercises, he gave the Shangri-La audience a taste of how China viewed negotiations. In China, we always say, "Mind your own business." Just that. Can independent countries like Australia live with the Chinese Communist Party without giving in to Beijing's demands for obedience, considering China's approach to unsolvable problems? We ought to take notice of the continued imposition of trade restrictions by China on Australia. These were put into effect by China specifically to subvert Australia's will. Not that it matters that they didn't succeed in doing so. Despite all the diplomatic hand-wringing billion-dollar sanctions against Australian products like wine, barley, and lobster remain in place and have for years at great financial expense. China simply gave in first when it realized it needed the imports more than it wanted to punish Australia in industries where sanctions had been eased, including thermal coal. Imagine you were a person who is doing alcohol business in Australia. As a part of expanding your business, you wish to have your products in foreign nations, and China is one among them. However, you were able to achieve your goal for all countries, excluding China. Unsettlingly, Australia's state media is currently discussing ways to compensate China for the removal of trade penalties that China imposed on Australia for Australia's audacity in defending its own sovereignty and national interests. Moreover, this purpose has been referred to as goodwill by the CCP mouthpiece, the Global Times, but it's hardly the basis of enduring and deep friendships. The idea that Beijing still thinks its punishments should extract concessions suggests we can expect more, not less, of this type of behavior. Even though Albanese has made it clear that Australia will not reward China for simply doing the right thing, after all, this would be the equivalent of paying diplomatic protection money. But having a conversation is one thing. Getting along is quite another. Any stabilization of relations cannot be referred to as a reset, as Wang has correctly stated in interviews and public statements, since every policy that past Australian governments deemed controversial is still in place. The difficulty with Australia-China ties is that the issues that previously caused problems have gotten worse. Being more courteous won't make essential concerns go away or alter binary facts when it comes to matters of sovereignty or fundamental national interest. A no is a no, no matter what. According to the Chinese government, you can either accept Huawei building your 5G network or you can't stand it. Chinese bases in the Pacific are no different. Imagine, you were the head of the Chinese nation. You are a person who always wishes the good for the people, no matter what. Soon, the issue between China and Australia arose, and you were given the final hand to make the decision. What would be your decision in this situation? Do share them in the comments. We know for a fact that China is not good at accepting bad news. Australia has strengthened its commitment to important diplomatic and strategic frameworks since Albanese took office. Australia plans to purchase 5 Virginia-class nuclear submarines before joining forces with the US and UK to build a new AUKUS-class submarine, a move that China finds deeply offensive. Moreover, Australia took part in the recent Balikatan exercises with the United States and the Philippines and hosted India's Malabar exercises in August 2023. Prior to this, Australia signaled a significant increase in defense spending through the Albanese government's recent Strategic Defense Review, a document that specifically named the military threat posed by China. Additionally, Australia's commitment to the second emerging Indo-Pacific superpower, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, was strengthened by his visit, even if the May-scheduled Quad leaders meeting was rescheduled. So, we believe that China thought Australia would become stronger than China, which is forcing them to make worse decisions. China, however, is pushing ahead with plans to use security agreements with an unstable government to build a military facility in the Solomon Islands. Assuming that Chinese President Xi Jinping hasn't picked the picturesque islands for vacation, we might conclude that Imperial Japan invaded the Solomons in 1942 with the intention of strategically choking continental Australia. Additionally, China hasn't given up on the idea of having Chinese military ships patrol Australia's coastline, despite the Pacific Islands, Forum members rejecting its aspirations to forge a larger regional security accord. Australia would not have had to choose between its security connection with the United States and its economic partnership with China, according to national leaders, for decades. Imagine Australia's getting support from all the countries, even though they don't have it from China. Will that alone be necessary for a country like Australia to grow further? What problems might the country face if they plan to start with such a race? Share your thoughts in the comments. China's savage assaults on Australian sovereignty ultimately decided things for Australia. The concerns of supply chain stability, sensitive technologies, competitiveness for new industries, and national security are progressively merging into one primary consideration, even in the context of an apparent free trade deal between China and Australia. Hence, neither Australia nor anybody else will be able to go back. Because of a successful rearguard action by the Labour opposition at the time, Australia had previously refused the adoption of extradition treaties with China, and it is inconceivable that the Albanese government would permit anything bad to happen to Australians who were living there. According to Albanese, Australia and China do dispute over human rights issues, making the bounties inappropriate. However, the destruction of democratic Hong Kong and the current worldwide hunt for those who remain loyal to it underscores the widening and for the most part irreconcilable divide between the worldviews of democratic Australia and Xi's China. Even past experiences indicate that Beijing will not take well to difficult decisions, no matter how nicely worded or presented. And the next time, the situation might not be different. And as the shadows of uncertainty loom over the Pacific, the intricate dance of diplomacy and power between China and Australia continues to unfold in ways that could reshape the global landscape. But this story is far from over. And if you found today's video enlightening, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really makes a difference. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have in store. Remember, in the world of international politics, what seems distant could be closer than you think. Join us as we continue to bring you insightful analysis and in-depth coverage of the China-Australia situation and much more. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and stay informed.